Tower blocks, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, is the well-known name for residential flats or apartments that are 6 floors high or above in the UK. Mainly referred to council or local authority brands rather than the luxury private units that we see advertised in, let's say, the more affluent Home Hunter magazine. Beginning around the 1950s and throughout the next few decades, every British town and city saw these buildings as part of their skyline. They were built as a solution to those without decent homes. So bright, clean, wonderful, with modern facilities that many Brits had never seen the likes of before. So what went wrong? What happened to change the phrase of streets in the sky to concrete in the clouds? What went so very wrong with high-rise living? Now, during the Second World War, there was plenty of aerial bombing which had destroyed many British homes, and there was an urgency to build homes for many millions of people who had been affected. There was also the problem that in the UK, they had homes by today's standards were unfit for purpose, such as back-to-back housing, poor plumbing, shared outdoor toilets, dim-lit old streets, rotting window frames. The houses were too old and too decrepit to upgrade. The country was crying out for new homes that were decent, and the government had to work out a plan. Architects were all ready to build a brand new Britain, and it wasn't the English country garden plan that many ordinary folks expected. The very first tower block, which we referred to as flats in the UK, was built in 1951 in Harlow in Essex as part of Britain's new towns. The block was designed by architect Frederick Gibbard, and to be honest, it had a fantastic look. It fitted in with a typical 1950s decor. It had a good look of hope and being carefully built amongst oak trees and green spaces, and it was shaped for more light and less oppression of actually being a large box with its butterfly-shaped idea. The block held 36 flats, mainly one bedroom, each of them having a balcony. Originally, it was designed to be 4 floors higher, but the local council denied that request as they had concern about the flats being too high and maybe wouldn't be as safe, even though if it had been taller, it would have been more economical. The block still stands today as a Grade 2 listed building. So far so good. The councils around the country wanted the idea in their areas. So what happened next? Because the block, called the Lawns, was a high-quality build using bricks and concrete, it was an expensive experiment. But land was expensive, and councils wanted to utilise the idea of using less land and house more people in need. They brought in architects and ideas from all over Europe to design these brand new promises of hope, of still living in slums and having to share their small dwellings with other families, or use lodging houses, who longed for a decent and a safe home. During the early 1950s, councils continued to use this blueprint of the first tower block, keeping them low, maintaining quality, but this proved to be expensive and challenging and very slow. So by 1956, new ideas of building were about to change everything. There was an urgent need to build homes. Slum areas needed clearing, and Britain's post-war population was on the rise, so high-rise flats were needed. Permission was granted, therefore, to accept designs of taller buildings. Why not? Less ground space, more homes, so thus more economical to be built and more affordable for councils. They loved the idea. They built in out-of-town areas where land was cheaper to increase the amount of homes for the needy. What could ever go wrong? People were advised of these bright, clean homes, plenty of living space, large windows, inside toilets and hot running water. An immediate community indeed, for the most, mainly the young. The idea was sold to the British people. Older people were very much reluctant. They'd want to lose their old community, their neighbours which they'd known all their lives, their small gardens. Many would sit in, have sit-ins, and ignored the compulsory purchase orders. The landscape was changing, or to quote a phrase from the band Depeche Mode, the landscape was dying. Who at the time believed that? The 1960s saw Britain as a massive building site, not just building the odd high block in our towns and our cities, but with a cost-effective idea of using prefabricated concrete panels, which could be installed on-site and literally bolted together to make the flats for as cheap as possible and a speedy build. We saw multiple blocks in the same areas. They were either called estates or courts, concrete communities, concrete jungles, flats, maisonettes, the community areas, the play areas, some actually having shops as part of the blocks dedicated to the ground floor, and even pubs and social clubs. It was forming a hub of social and practical advantage to all the new residents. The tower blocks got taller and wider to accommodate thousands of people all in that small area, which was solving the housing crisis in a matter of a few years. But moreover, far less space was needed, a far less expensive ground. People didn't need to leave the estate to get their social or personal needs. The architects were getting praised and rewarded and a pat on the back. So why would this turn to a kick in the ass in years to come? And not many years either. But Ronan Point happened, the most famous high-rise flats disaster. In 1968, which highlighted the dangers of cheaper building methods and the lack of inspections. It made the whole country think again about the safety of those towers and the failures from architecture, cheap materials, untrained builders, and unscrupulous building companies. Many documentaries have covered the Ronan Point disaster, so I'll make it brief. Ronan Point was one of many similar flats on an East London estate. A 22-storey block collapsed all down one corner like a house of cards after a lady who used a match to light her gas stove to make an early morning cup of tea. A cooker had been leaking overnight and the gas had been building up in the hallway and the living room. Ivy Hodge miraculously survived the blast as she was thrown back into a hallway, whilst one of the pre-constructed load-bearing panels blew outwards and began a domino effect of all floors on the corner of that block collapsing one by one. 4 people sadly lost their lives, and the only reason that more people were not affected was because it was very early in the morning and a lot of residents were still in their bedrooms. The cooker survived. In fact, Ivy took the cooker to a new residence. The finding of the disaster was not isolated to one block alone. The missing bolts, the misaligned panels were found in some flats of this type, which was frightening for the many residents still living there. Suddenly, streets in the sky became cracks in the clouds. No one was comfortable anymore. Britain's love affair with high-rise living was over. New rules did apply for people's safety: no gas cookers after a certain height, no gas portable heaters, no petrol heaters, and more safety checks. Whilst many residents of the flats were mainly happy in their homes and communities, there were many that were not. By 1970, around 9% of Brits were living in flats, which amounts to about 4 to 5 million people when you consider families. But they would find it hard to be rehoused, even though this small flat is no longer fit for purpose as families started to grow. Councils were spending less money on the grounds, play areas and facilities that once served communities, and shops were all closing down. There was a more isolating feature and a more lonely feeling for those who had once cherished these wonderful homes. Brokenness in the blocks. TV documentaries and even grim drama shows were now using these locations to report either the fall of the flats or to dramatise or even depress viewers on a hard-hitting drama programme that would be about crime, or desperation. The lack of investment and council budgetary cuts meant that the blocks themselves began to suffer premature ageing, crumbling issues. Residents made numerous complaints with their problems not being taken with much priority. Damp, mould, cracks in the walls and even ceilings were reported. Even things as dangerous as windows literally dropping out. They were living in the sky and they felt so helpless. Despair in the distance, especially when the lifts broke down repeatedly. Let's look at this. Someone moving into a block in, let's say, 1960 and is still there in 1979. That's 19 years of personal change. Like I said, maybe a growing family. Or a middle-aged tenant is now 19 years old and would become more elderly and feel much more isolated if they didn't have a lift to use to leave their homes. Then the right to buy came along. Perhaps according to the Conservative government, they may solve the issues. People would buy their own homes from the council if eligible, and they would take pride in ownership and maintaining their own castle. All the people took advantage of this opportunity, all right. Owning their own council place, they took their pride, did repairs, upped their property values, but only the tenants that had decent housing in decent areas. Those that were living in the tower blocks that were run down had no intention, and who would blame them? So that backfired on Thatcher's government. They did not want to buy their crumbling apartment. Rubbish chutes being blocked, bringing vermin such as rats to the party. Then the gangs and the drugs and the dossers, all very intimidating. What they wanted was out. So council still had the same headache, and to top it all, it decided that problem families or problem individuals would be offered accommodation by the housing authorities in these high rises. Vandalism was rife, shops were closed, and what was once seen as a wonderful dream of brutalism became brutal. Let's just explain brutalism when it comes to the architecture world. It's not as bad as you may think. Well, actually, even though it has a completely different meaning, brutalism will never change your mind now. Okay, it comes from the French phrase béton brut, meaning raw concrete. So if you see a 1960s building that looks like grey concrete with no bricks showing, with geometric shapes, looking plain or even daunting with no decoration, that's brutalism. It was economical and, according to the designers, gave the building a look of majesty, indestructible strength and permanence. I wonder, look, if you were to look at these buildings, would you agree? Or maybe you would see cold, grey, depressing and intimidating. Me personally, I love architecture and I cannot help but feel fascination and wonder when I look at them. Say looking at them, not being unfortunate to have to live in them. So here we are then, we're in the 1980s with the derelict and sometimes empty blocks by now, which have become areas, no-go areas for the police, the postal services, the taxi drivers. They've had their day, so it's time for them to go. Not all of them, but for the next decade or two, many were demolished. Locals would come out and witness the event with mixed feelings, many saying good riddance, whilst others who had lived in those in the early days had the great memories of living in the sky, and now they're going to the ground. The existing blocks to be upgraded, made safer, but it didn't quite work out again. The poorer people were allotted to these flats, and according to reports, through no fault of their own, bring higher risks. Now this is according to the experts, the psychologists, right? Lack of affordability indicates buying second-hand furniture and keeping old items that may not have been fire-treated. Overcrowded, because of the cost of some people not being able to leave home, made more danger. The cost of heating, which gave away to cheaper mobile heating devices, and they say that poorer people have the highest statistics of being smokers. By no means can one blame someone's financial situation for any of this. Better means of employment, safeguarding and state assistance would have eradicated most of this, and decent upkeeping by the councils. So experts, you may have some clout but not the answer. Decent people don't choose to live in places such as these. For many, it was no other choice. Originally designed to be fire-contained, the flats lacked inspections, fire gets through cracks. And as for fire suppression and extinguisher facilities, many have reported a big lax in any inspections by local authorities, not to forget the sad and disastrous cladding on some of the blocks that made them even more dangerous as a fire hazard. And God bless everyone involved in that Renville fire. My thoughts and prayers, and as I'm sure you will all agree. So have they learned? Well, yes and no. Flats and apartments of the high-rise nature are springing up in our cities, if you can afford them. If you're an investor.